All right, Akim, Shalom, Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. And salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwat that may listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick lesson. And for today's, I'm just going to be diving into a little bit of history in regards to Negroes and so-called Indians mixing amongst each other, right? And uh, one thing I guess we've noticed with Israelites that Israel has essentially. I'm not speaking about so-called Negroes specifically. They like to take on the wives of generally the other nations, right? And this is where you get these terms such as so-called mixed, right? But the reverse, and then when they have children, for example, you will notice that their children will come out a little bit lighter than typical, right? But what I want to do is go through a little bit of history and show that the reverse is also possible, right? So Jake kind of mixing amongst, I guess, themselves, and then they don't look like your typical, I suppose, northern kingdom type of Israelite. They don't look a little bit fair. The hair's on a little bit more straight, like how so-called Native Americans are normally portrayed. And what I want to do with this history, I'm going to be just bringing out a couple things. And Hamaratis, as always, this lesson may be edifying, right? So a little bit to cover, so let's just jump right in, right? So in my hand, I have a book known as Black Indians, The Hidden Heritage. So what I'm going to do, as a matter of fact, let me open up with this precept before I actually start. Okay, this is First Corinthians chapter 2, verse 12. And it reads, "Now we have received not the spirit of the world, which the spirit of the Most High, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of the Most High." Verse 13, "Which things we also speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Spirit teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual." And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this out was the fact that when you hear about man's wisdom, especially in the West, they kind of keep as I guess people in a box, right? So you're either so-called black, white, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, um, what's the other one? Chinese, I guess. But we understand, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai that there are lineages of people. When you go back to like Noah's sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and the separate nations that branched off, amongst those other nations, amongst those three men, excuse me, right? And so we understand that according a child's lineage is according to their fathers, right, and not necessarily always by exactly how they look, right? Um so let me get to this. Is page 36 in this is Black Indians, right? So it says the following: "It was in Mexico that Europeans tested their strongest efforts to keep Africans apart, from Native Americans. Black men far outnumbered their women, and so sought Indian wives." So already you start to see there's a mixing, right? So Native American wife meant if she was free, that children born to her would be free, not slaves. So extensive was the contact between the red. I hate to say what it says red, because Esau is really the one that's actually red. But verbatim, what it says here, it says red and black people, that Spanish law prohibited the two races from living together or marrying, right? So you actually had situations where, you saw, the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom, they were kind of mixing amongst each other because then they found some, I guess you can call it like commonalities amongst each other without actually knowing that, their actual true heritage, which is, your descent from the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So uh, further on, it says, as early as 1523, Hernando Cortez was given a royal order to keep Indians and their villages apart from Africans at all costs. Just excuse me 1 second. Okay, excuse me for that. So here, continuing on, it says, so I'll read this again. It says, as early as 1523, Hernando Cortez was given a royal order to keep Indians in their villages apart from Africans at all costs. This was only 7 years after Venice, Italy, isolated its Jews in the first ghetto in history. One royal order forbade trade, commerce, and communication between the two peoples of color, which just goes to show that a lot of these Northern Kingdom tribes, they were a lot darker back then. So this is during like the 15 and 1600s, right? And so in this chapter, it's specifically going into the 1570s, right? So here it says they were forbidden to sell chickens, fruit, vegetables, and both defied the law, right? So I'm just going to get a little bit more and then bring in a couple scriptures. Um, Further on, so this is page 38, and it says racial mixing was so common in Mexico that it became hard to tell by skin color who was free and who was slave. King Philip complained that young black Indians, committed crimes and dressed as Indians so they can hide out with their mother's relatives and cannot be found, right? So if they're so imagine, you can just imagine how dark a lot of these, I guess, quote unquote, so-called Native Americans were at that time, right? So let's get, okay, this is Hosea 1 verse 10, and it says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. It shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living power, right? And our people, today, because of so much mixing, they would come in looking like all the different nations, especially all the nations that we got scattered, because pursuant to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64, we got scattered into all nations, right? So so you have a lot of typical, you have your typical um, uh, look of how an Israelite will look, but there's also the reverse as well. You have some that look a lot lighter, and then you have, I guess your typical Israelite that does it, that looks a lot darker, right? When people might think, okay, this might be a so-called Negro, but because of what this account I'm bringing out here, you have a lot of Israelites that look like they might be more of a northerner, they might be more of a so-called Native American, but they're actually but they look like a so-called Negro essentially. And just to bring out a quick example of that, a very popular example of this is actually Michael Jackson. Now, Michael Jackson, he actually had one of his great grandfathers actually named Israel, and his family, like his forefathers, actually go back to so-called Choctaw Indians, right? So which explains, he has a lot of dark hair, but if you look at his hair, Sorry, he has dark features, like dark skin, but if you look at his hair, he has more of that type 3 kind of hair, but it's not as kinky as so-called Negroes, right? So let me just finish up this last bit here. And here it says King Philip complained that the young black Indians committed crimes and then dressed as Indians so they could hide out with their mother's relatives and cannot be found. The genetic blending of the two peoples clearly weakened the control Europeans wanted over their slaves. Europeans feared any dark person might be a slave driven to desperation or out of revenge. One lived in constant fear, wrote a Spanish colonist, right? And so I want to bring in a couple more excerpts in like future lessons, but the point I wanted to bring out in this lesson was the fact that you would have so-called Negroes they mixed amongst each other with the so-called Native Americans. So you would have typical Native Americans that look like a lot darker than they normally would, right? And the point of another point I wanted to bring out was the fact that there was a shared commonality between these two particular people. They're different. How would you call it? They're different colors, but part of the same canvas. They're cut from the same cloth because they're both Israelites. So that was one of the more things that was really, really fascinating, I thought. So, okay, this is Ezekiel 37, verse 7, and it reads, So I prophesied, and I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise and a shaking, and the bones came together, bone of his bone. Verse 8, And behold, lo, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and the skin covered them from above, but there was no breath in them, right? And so let's pause that for a second. So, what are the bones, right? So, these bones, when it says in verse 11 here, it says, And he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried and no hope lost, and we are cut off from our parts, right? So, why are these people dry? They're dry because they did not have an understanding of who they were as a people, right? So when it says there was a noise and a shaking, the bones were coming together. So this represents, you know, um, the Israelites. They were coming, even though they did not know have an understanding of of their biblical nationality, but they were finding commonalities amongst each other. For example, one of the things that occurred very often in what was it, the not 1600s, the 1960s, you had different movements where Judah and Gad, they were having their own movements. I know there was a movement known as the Native American movement. That was one of them. And then you had so-called Black Panthers. So that those bones, they were coming together because they actually understood and recognized that, okay, the so-called white man is oppressing us, and they're going to come together with their, I guess you can essentially, it's a vain initiative, right? But the point is they were coming together because they shared commonality amongst each other, because they are Israelites, right? That's why they found so much common ground amongst each other. Just a quick testimony. I remember last year there was I ended up going to this event, and it was like a farmers market, and I kid you not, this farmers market was specifically required only to participate. It was only for so-called Negroes and so-called Native Americans. And I thought that was so interesting because it strongly embodied the next precept where it says here, And behold, the sinews and the flesh came upon them, and the skin covered them, but there was no breath in them, because they didn't have an understanding of of their power, one, and then they have an understanding of who they were as a people. They were, okay, you're an Israelite and your power is Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, and that is that breath and that wisdom and knowledge understanding that comes from the Holy Scriptures. And that is something you still see even to this day, that our people, they will come together with their vain, shallow, quote unquote, initiatives to try and come together, but they don't come together under the banner and under the vibration of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. They come together under so-called, black businesses or, different movements and so on and so forth. Right. So and that was one of the things I thought that was very fascinating, because you saw within, and there's other excerpts in the book that actually go into this as well, because you saw, you know, um, the so-called Seminoles and you saw the so-called Negroes. They were kind of mixing and mingling amongst each other, and they developed this strong vibration, a strong camaraderie, I should say, amongst each other. Right. So hopefully, Yahweh Ratazah, this is all piecing together and making sense, right? So there's another precept I wanted to get. This is Sirach 27, verse 9, and it says, "The birds will resort unto their like, so will the truth return unto them that practice in her." Right? So, you know, it was very interesting in the couple excerpts that they noticed, the so-called Negroes and the so-called Native Americans, so-called Seminoles, that they shared a lot of common values among, like, with each other when it comes to family and raising children, and trading, so on and so forth, because they actually understood. They didn't have the breath like it says in Ezekiel, but they had they shared those, I guess you can call it morals, scruples, values, so on and so forth, where they came together and they realized, okay, we're very, we can have, we can share some kind of camaraderie, right? But our people don't have fully, they don't have the breath, which is like the full understanding and makes you alive, right? And the breath is so important, because without that, our people are part of like the congregation of the dead, like it says in Proverbs, right? So um I'm about 18 minutes in right now, so that kind of covers it. There's more to it, so I'll bring out other excerpts as I go along, but I just wanted to bring out a little history in regards to excuse me, so-called Negroes, so-called Seminoles, Native Americans mixing amongst each other. And you will have situations where you might come across a so-called, northerner from a northern tribe, for example, but they look like I guess a typical, southerner tribe, right? So-called black person, right? So there's some things to keep in mind as well, um, Khan. So, hopefully, Yahweh Rataza, this was edifying, and I'd just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. The next time I say Shalom.